Hey guys, welcome back to Tabletop Glory. I want to apologize for this week's video going up as late as it did. We're not really sure over here at Tabletop how much longer we're going to be able to maintain this schedule, as my new job, according to the job description, will only give me 1 day a week off, and the amount of time that it's going to take to transport myself back and forth between the job and home may result in me only having a couple of hours throughout the week to work on a video outside of my day off. So we may end up switching our upload schedule to once a month and uploading bonus content here and there when I can afford the time. And that's just an unfortunate reality of what is going to happen. I'm going to attempt to get live streaming going here on YouTube, so that way at least I can live stream once a month and have once a month uploads, so that you guys will be getting at least 2 content videos per month. And yeah, unfortunately that is just the reality of the situation. Now for today's video, we're going to be talking about display plinths that can also double up as terrain. And what I mean about that is specifically something that you can put in your display case to kind of help act like a riser, to make it so that smaller models don't necessarily get lost in the mix once you start to stuff your display case. As anyone who's ever tried to put a display case together can tell you, you run out of room pretty quick and things just kind of blend together in this sea of models, and it can be hard to tell what's what. So this should help you kind of make a little step up and split out your models a bit better, so that they're more easily displayed and recognizable in that display. But it can also be pulled out and used for terrain. So let's talk about that. So I just want to take a second to talk about the tool I'm using. This is a hot wire foam cutter, but this has what's referred to as a plunge and cut tool, which essentially allows me to plunge directly into the foam. It's really great for doing projects like what we're working on today, but if you just have a normal hot wire foam cutter, that's going to work just fine. Now if you do have a razor blade, you're going to want to make a lot of vertical cuts to kind of get the same shape as what we're going for. Unfortunately, these tools, meaning a hot wire cutter, are just the way to go for this type of project. If you're going to be doing lots of little cuts with a razor knife, then you're going to end up with a lot of extra little scraps, and you may want to work over a trash can because it can be quite messy. Now, a lot of times people will refer to this type of terrain as game store terrain because it can be stacked and stored quite easily, and a lot of the time this is the type of terrain that you will see at your local game store. It's quite cheap and easy to make. You can make it out of recycled materials, or in my case, I'm using XPS foam, which is extruded polystyrene foam. This is the type of stuff that they insulate houses with. I had some oddball shapes and sizes left over for some bigger projects, and I thought this would be a good use for it. But basically you can see I'm just kind of wiggling my cutter back and forth and working my way through really slowly. If you've got a low heat setting, I recommend doing that because you get a bit more control over it. And we're just going to kind of cut out an oddball oval shape. Now you can cut out whatever shape you really want. The 2 shapes that I end up using is basically just a round puck and an L bracket is what I'm going to refer to it as. It's just an L shape. But again, you could cut these in whatever size you want and whatever shapes you want. In my case here, I'm just going to be using the puck as an example here. We want to go ahead and lay out a ruler, or in my case, I'm using a 90-degree angle here to lay out a grid pattern. Now I'm choosing 1-inch grids. You could choose to not put a grid. I'm doing this because I plan to use this for all kinds of games, and it's really nice for D&D to be able to have that grid system. But if you're just using this for Warhammer, I wouldn't even bother with a grid because you're just going to measure things out with a ruler anyway. But the goal is to try and fit as much of a grid on here as we can, and then we're going to cut that grid out using our hot wire foam cutter. Now if you only have a hobby knife, your best way to kind of cut those grids out is going to be cutting at an angle, about a 15-degree angle, and just cutting little slits. So you're going to cut an angle from one direction and then flip over and cut from the other direction to just kind of remove a little slit of material, and that's how you're going to cut a grid using a knife. Now you're going to notice that despite how little I'm touching the foam, some of these cuts end up actually going pretty deep, and that's okay. You want to try to not go all the way through the foam because we can kind of fill back in later once we go to add our dirt texture. A mixture of glue and whatever textures or flocks that you end up deciding to use is going to be just fine for filling those gaps back in a little bit, but you may decide that you want yours a little deeper. Now my basing paste here that I'm using is my homemade version of Battlemire from Games Workshop. Now basically what it is it's just some paint and some wall filler mixed with an aggregate like sand and some small rocks. It works really great for a basing texture and to kind of knock out terrain really quickly. And maybe I'll make a video about how to make it someday in the future, but for right now, if you don't have something like this, you can buy textured basing paste in bulk from companies like Liquitex. If you don't want to waste your time with that, you can just use a little bit of wall spackle mixed with some water and just kind of rough it up with your fingers to get a rough earth texture and then paint it brown. It will work just fine. Once that dries, we're going to want to go ahead and use a gray paint. Now I'm just using generic craft paints. If you want to use that, that's the best because you don't want to use your good hobby paints on something like this. Now you could use spray paint, which is why I've sealed mine with a coat of Mod Podge around the outside edge, but you don't have to. I've just decided to do it by hand. As you can see, I make a bit of a mess there, but just go ahead and put a nice even coat of gray around the whole outside edge. Once you're done with your gray layer, we're going to dry brush some white. Now you want to be a little careful with this and use as little white as possible because a little's going to go a long way. And we're just going to dry brush the raised edges with white all the way around the outside. Now if you wanted this to look a bit more like natural stone, you could hit this with some washes like some Agrax Earthshade, maybe a little bit of Nuln Oil, some Fugan Orange, something like that, just to add some pops of color to the rock and make it look like there's some minerals in there before applying your dry brush, and that'll work just fine. It'll look really natural. But in my case, I just wanted these to be functional, and I wasn't super worried about them looking natural. And besides, I tend to play a lot of fantasy games anyway, and I knew that if it looked too natural, it wasn't going to blend in with a lot of the settings I would want to use this terrain with anyways. Now, ignoring my amazing camera work here, we just want to put a coat of glue all along the top, anywhere where there's brown. The reason we're covering up the brown with flocking is, number one, it makes it look more natural, but as the flocking breaks down, that brown layer is still going to be under there and will still look like dirt texture. So you're not going to be exposing your foam and have like weird colors like blues or pinks or whatever color your foam happens to be underneath all of your grass. It'll look a lot more natural. Don't worry about the glue pooling up too much in those cracks and crevices because as it dries, it'll suck down tight against the surface and reveal them again. So we just want to go ahead and put a nice healthy dose of flock across the top. I'm using foam flock because it'll soak into the glue a lot better. If all you have is static grass, that'll work just fine. Just understand that more of that dirt texture is going to show, which makes it more important that you use that dirt texture rather than just going straight to your grass flock. Now I'm switching over to my larger piece because it'll be a little easier for you guys to see what's going on, but as you can see, I've got this piece now. You can kind of still see where my grid is. When you see it from directly above, it's much more obvious. And we're going to mix some glue 50-50 with water, and what that's going to be is it's going to help us to lock everything down. See, if we just left it the way it is, it hasn't completely soaked into the foam and it could kind of crumble off quite easily. If you were just doing this for your display case, this would honestly be just fine, but for a piece we're going to play with, we really want to do our best to try and lock this foam down and make it as strong as possible. So you can either use some rubbing alcohol in some kind of either spray adapter or some kind of eyedropper bottle. We want to get a good even coat of isopropanol all over the whole surface, which is just rubbing alcohol. Now you could use water if you don't have rubbing alcohol, and that's no big deal. You could see that even the force of me using this sprayer, some of that foam flock was breaking free and coming loose. So that's why we're doing this stage. Now I'm just taking an eyedropper. You could use a paintbrush, but I feel like an eyedropper works just fine. And we're dropping the glue mixture onto the foam flock, and what the rubbing alcohol is doing is it's breaking down the surface tension of the foam flock, and it's allowing the glue to just spread out all into that foam flock. You can see how it's just kind of oozing into all of the foam and really gonna help make it strong when it dries. And this process does take quite a long time to dry, so I am going to warn you that you are going to want to put this in an area that maybe is a little bit warmer in your house where it can sit on a nice level surface, and that'll help it to dry a little bit faster. And there you have it, folks, a really great way to recycle styrofoam, especially any oddball pieces that you don't think will work for maybe bigger projects and things like that. And it's also a really great way to make some risers for your display case. Now, again, you could stack this as high as you want. I've seen people, when I used to own my hobby store, I saw people stack little pieces of foam like this 4 and 5 inches high, and it works really great for line of sight blocking for Warhammer 40k. And I think it works great for a lot of sources, whether it be D&D, Warhammer, other things like that. So just keep in mind that this process does take a while because of how much time it takes for the glue to dry. So if you've got like a card table or something that you can set up, that's great, because then you can do staging, meaning that you can have a workspace and you can have a dry space, and you can just set everything aside and let it dry. I was planning to do quite a large amount of this and covering a bunch of different topics as well as different designs like jungle terrain, Nurgle terrain, corn terrain. I was planning to do a lot of Warhammer related stuff as well as D&D stuff. I was even going to talk about how we can adapt this to work as cave interiors for D&D. Unfortunately, just because of my personal schedule and because of what's going on with me trying to get back into a stable work condition, it just didn't work out. In any case, going forward, we're going to try and do some Let's Paints and some smaller tutorial stuff where we kind of focus a bit more on how to do certain aspects of the hobby, as that's really all I'm going to have the time for moving forward. Hopefully, once I've been with this company for a little bit, I can transfer back from a full-time position into a part-time position once I've got some more job security, and that'll give me more time to work on stuff for the channel as well. But yeah, fingers crossed everything works out, that I do land the job like we're hoping, and that I can switch to a part-time position down the road. But for right now, life is what it is, and I apologize for what the channel is going to become, but there will definitely be at least one upload a month. I'm going to go out of my way to guarantee that. So in any case, thank you guys for all the love and support. Thank you guys for just subscribing and believing in what I'm doing. And until next time, may your display case always be filled and your pile of shame never run empty.